like my first
Hi to almost everybody, but if my trainings and pictures that I never see comes to me after, I miss all of you so much. With the lady in the shadow, yeah, just give her like, make her Anastasia. I actually sit by you, actually. No, I took the outskirts of the basic right. I just wanted to lot in case I very intense, very like big personalities. I feel so and I told Andy, but like we must have like farther out west. Usually they go closer to our home, so it works out. And you only have like 8 minutes where we like 15, 20 minutes. Yeah, you know, but like 12 minutes, and now it's 8. But they keep it in their town like like marketing is one of the so it's just a small like R&D area. So kids grew up for such jobs, and so you know, it's kind of like the writing of the whole. You just plugged out because it looks like you're down. That's something in your back pocket. So where would you want to go? And of course, this is going along the line of places where the business is. Okay. Hi, everybody. Let's get started. Hi, Becky. We love you. If you guys don't know me, I'm Becky. I'm the owner of Unleashed. I invited all of you here today to celebrate our 10-year anniversary, which is really exciting. Mindy here was actually one of our very, very first daycare dogs. She was the first one to ever buy a package. And I also wanted to share with all of you some of the stuff that I've learned about dogs over the years. So thanks for coming. My career in animal behavior started in college when I studied primate behavior at the University of Michigan. After college, I worked at a zoo and interned at a zoo for a little while. Considered studying primates in the wild, but then I got a job at a dog daycare. And at the time, it was a brand new industry. No one had really heard of it. But I was was immediately struck by the relationships that the dogs formed with each other at daycare. They seemed at least as interesting and complicated as the ones that I had learned about in primates in school. So it turned out that, well, back then there really wasn't any studies of how dogs relate to each other. Some stuff had come out about the way that dogs relate to humans, but not really anything on dog-dog relationships. So it turned out that a professor of mine back in Michigan, Barbara Smuts, who was studied with Jane Goodall and also had written a book on friendship and baboons, had just started some exciting research on play behavior in dogs. So I joined her team along with Eric Bauer and Camille Ward and set out to collect some data on dog-dog relationships. So, when I first started work on my dissertation, dominance was a highly debated topic in the dog world. So I have here the D word. So for a long time, people had assumed that dogs formed dominance relationships. Some people, like Cesar Millan, the TV dog whisperer, assumed that dominance was a very important part of every single relationship that dogs formed, whether it was with humans or with other dogs. And others in the dog training world rejected that assumption and claimed that dominance didn't apply to dogs at all. Understandably, they objected to people using dominance as an excuse to intimidate or mistreat dogs. But regardless, people had really strong opinions about it, but there was really no data to support one side of the argument or the other. So I set out to collect some. Well, now when most people hear the word dominance, they think of a pecking order, which comes from chickens, where the guy on top beats up the guy below him and takes the food, the second guy beats up the guy below him and takes the food, and so on down the line. But when animal societies get more complex and when group members form close social bonds with each other, dominance becomes a little more nuanced. So Franz de Waal is a primatologist, and he was the first to introduce a concept called formal dominance, which is a little bit different than competitive dominance. In formal dominance, the subordinate animal will consistently display submission to the dominant, even if the subordinate sometimes wins a competitive encounter. So formal dominance is more about communication than it is about aggression or competition. And formal dominance relationships have been reported in a lot of primate species, including chimps and baboons, and they've also been reported in wolves. So in order to find out what dominance looks like in dogs, we recorded three types of agonistic behaviors in a group of 24 dogs here at Unleashed. And the three types of agonistic behaviors are submission, dominance displays, and aggression. So if a behavior does indeed communicate status, it should be unidirectional or one way, which means one animal in the relationship displays it to the other, but not the other way around. And dominance relationships and any behaviors related to status should be linear in the group. So that means if A is dominant to B and B is dominant to C, then A is also dominant to C. If C is dominant to A, that becomes a circular relationship. So if dominance does accurately apply to the group, they're supposed to be linear. So this is what I set out to measure. So first I'm going to show you some examples of submissive behaviors in dogs. So this is Brady showing submission to Nevin. And this is called active submission, where the subordinate dog licks the muzzle of the dominant dog. The subordinate dog also usually has a crouch posture where they're really low. Here's Gigi submitting to Jedi, and you can see Gigi's keeping herself kind of even lower than Jedi is, which is a smaller dog. This is Daphne submitting to Charlie. Here's Cece submitting to Maple. And some of these dogs aren't with us anymore, so some of these videos are really sad, but also sweet. Here's Wallaby and Lizzie. Now here's one point. In this relationship, Wallaby is in the dominant role, and Lizzie is being submissive. And here's Wallaby in the submissive role, so he's submitting to Paddington. So dominance is more about a relationship than it is about a personality of a dog. Here's another type of submission. This is called passive submission, where the dog rolls over and exposes its belly for another dog. This is Aisha with Cullen and Daisy, I think. This is Wrigley and Hazel. Here's Mindy. She's submitting to Charlie.
That never happens at home.
One point about passive submission, the rolling over kind of belly up position, it's a little bit tricky because it's different than when dogs roll over during play. So it really only counts as a submissive behavior if it's not in a playful context. So you'll see lots of role reversals during play with dogs flopping over. Muzzle licking, it turns out, is different, and that seems to be consistent whether they're playing or not. Here we have dominance displays. So the dominance displays include high posture, where a dog approaches another dog with a kind of stiff, erect posture, ears and tail high. As you can see, sometimes, like this sheepdog can't raise his ears or his tail, so sometimes it's hard to see what he's doing. But that high posture is one dominance display. A muzzle bite is another one where the dog kind of gently bites the muzzle of another dog. A chin over, where one dog puts his chin over the shoulders of another dog, and then mounts or pumping. You'll see some videos of this. So these are the behaviors that we recorded as dominance displays. So that's Benny and Paddington. This is Vonnegut and Ricky. You can kind of see they both have that kind of stiff, tall posture. This is Henry and Yogi. Some of these videos are pretty cool. Here's Wallaby and Cody, and Cody is muzzle biting Wallaby. Wallaby almost shoves his mouth in Cody's mouth. Frankie muzzle biting Janie. And Wallaby comes in and does a chin over to Frankie. Here's Grover and Wrigley. Grover's gonna pump Wrigley. Some mounting. This is Ozzy and Mason, and you'll see Mason will do some chin overs. And even though he doesn't mount, he does this thrusting behavior. Here Jake is gonna try to mount Daphne. So the third type of agonistic behavior is aggression, and most of these are pretty mild threats. So we'll see a couple examples here. That's Muddy and Lily. Here's Lily and Paddington. This is Daisy and Lola. She did a little snap and a little show teeth. This is Lizzie and Siggy. This is Finley with Mika, and Finley's going to threaten jelly beans. So, now, sometimes they are a little bit more than just threats, and it turns into a fight. And when that happens, if I'm videoing, that's usually what it looks like, because I usually drop the camera and try to break up the fight. So I don't have good examples of fights. They do occasionally happen. So what we found is that it turned out that the daycare dogs did form an age-based linear dominance hierarchy, with older dogs outranking younger dogs. And age was a lot more important than size or sex. So we had smaller dogs that were dominant to bigger dogs, males dominant to females, females dominant to males. But over 90% of the relationships, that had dominance, the older dog was the dominant dog. And even that 10% of relationships where the younger dog was dominant, they were within a year of each other, so they were really close in age. So for the most part, older dogs are dominant to younger dogs. We also found that submission was the best indicator of dominance relationships. It was by far the most frequent behavior, so it was like 3 times more frequent than aggression and like 5 times more frequent than the dominance displays. It was also the most unidirectional and the most linear behavior, more than dominance or aggression. So it really seemed to be the best indicator of dominance relationships. And as you can see, a dominance display, like when we looked at the high posture, a dominance display isn't always met with submission from the other dog. So it could be ignored or it could be returned to the dominance display. So it's not really the best indicator of an accepted dominance relationship. Submission is a much better behavior to look at. Specifically muzzle licking. stood out as the best fit for a display of formal submission. So it seemed to be the most frequent of all the submissions, all the submissive behaviors, and again, the most unidirectional and linear. So a lot of these results show similarities between dogs and wolves as far as the way that dominance relationships are expressed, and how they're kind of arranged in the group. However, unlike the published data that we have on wolves and most primate groups, many of the pairs of dogs, 2/3 actually of the dogs, of the relationships, not 2/3 of the dogs, but 2/3 of the relationships were blank, which means neither dog showed submission to each other, to either one. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in number form. This is a behavior matrix. So this is all the submissive behavior in the group. Each dog is listed both on the vertical axis and the horizontal. This is the actor, and this is the recipient of the behavior. So you'll see here these high-ranking dogs didn't show very much submission at all, but they received submission from all these dogs. The middle-ranking dogs showed submission to the higher-ranking dogs, but did not show submission to the lower-ranking dogs. And then the lower-ranking dogs showed submission to all these dogs, but didn't receive very much submission at all. Okay? So there are a couple notable exceptions that are highlighted here, and all of these are cases of bidirectional submission, where both dogs showed submission to each other. But it was definitely the exception to the rule. And in almost all of these relationships, the animals were very close. They had a very close relationship and friendly relationship, which is interesting. But the other striking thing you'll see is all these blank relationships. So all these blank cells means that neither dog showed submission to the other dog. So it looks like both sides of the argument of dominance have some merit to it when you look on the data. So some dominance seems to be really important to some dog relationships, and didn't really seem to apply at all to other dog-dog relationships. So next we got into some of the good stuff. We wanted to learn more about these relationships, and specifically we wanted to find out how friendly behaviors fit into the picture. So we asked, how are play fighting and other affiliative behaviors distributed among the dogs, and how are they related to dominance? What about all these relationships that didn't have any dominance? Did those pairs of dogs exchange friendly behavior? Do dogs form different types of relationships? And finally, we want to know if dogs formed friendships, which are particularly close affiliative relationships with certain other dogs. So, to answer these questions, we recorded two types of affiliative behavior, or friendly behavior. The first one is play fighting, so I'm sure all you guys are familiar with this, especially if your dog comes to daycare. But play fighting uses behaviors that mimic behaviors that you'll see in a real fight, but they're inhibited, meaning they're not meant to hurt the other individual, and they're usually accompanied by fluid and bouncy movements and play signals like play bows and a play face, which is like a relaxed open mouth. But those behaviors include chasing and tackling, wrestling, biting, jaw sparring with each other. So we'll see some examples of play fighting. This is Banyan and Ollie. This is Thunder and Lily. Here's Duke and Izzy. The little guys do it too. This is Rainbow and Yoda.
Oh my goodness.
Here's Paco, he's here today, and his friend Spy.
Is that Bella?
That's Spy, he doesn't come anymore. This is Xena and Bailey. Here's Cullen and Flynn. This is Cece and Stillwater. Here's Jamie Oliver and Plum. So Jamie Oliver is not super big on wrestling, but he does like a good chase sometimes. So, dogs also affiliate in more gentle ways. So we call this gentle affiliation. And these behaviors, they don't mimic behaviors that you'll see in aggression, but instead they mimic behaviors that are observed during courtship or grooming, or sometimes at friendly greetings. And these include gentle nose nudges, licks, nibbles, and nuzzles, which are like head rubs. These behaviors are a little more rare and fleeting than play fighting. They're also different than play fighting. When we recorded the play, it was by definition mutual play, so both dogs were involved. Gentle affiliation, on the other end, could be directional, so one dog performs the behavior to the other. It's a little different than play. Let's watch some of these. This is Riley doing nose nudge on Sunny. Here's Buddy nose nudging Charlie. Scary and Spy being extra adorable. It's just a lot of nose nudges. This is Jedi and Alpine. Some nice gentle nose nudges. This is Ozzy and Boku, and you see this, in this case, they were both doing it to each other, so sometimes they were saying, Junior and Mindy, and sometimes the nose nudges are not always G-rated. You see, some of these interactions will look a little bit like courtship behaviors. This is Grover and Wally. Here's Lily and Paddington. This is Corey and Nevin. These two are long-term lovers. This is Wallaby and Zora. This is some adorable nuzzling. They rub heads at each other. Here's Kedzie and Sunny doing some nuzzling. This is Sophie doing some nuzzles on Ollie. And some nose nudges too. This is Boo nibbling Daisy. And some nose nudges too, but they do this little nibble groom, which is just with their very front teeth, which I assume is taken as grooming behavior, like maybe they bit fleas on each other, wolves or in the wild. Here's Lizzie B nibbling her friend Eddie. And this is Wallaby giving a face bath to Junebug. So those are, Junebug has passed away, but those were my two dogs, and he would groom her face and ears and just for forever. I told him to stop a lot of the time. It would just go on for like half an hour. Interestingly, I would, at least twice, I found out that she had an ear infection because he was just licking and licking and licking and licking over her ears. Sometimes it provides useful information, but that looks like grooming. So you see there's like some grooming and some courtship kind of type behaviors that are different than play fighting. So, when we looked at the presence or absence of affiliation and the presence or absence of one-way submission in each pair of dogs, we identified 4 different types of relationships. So 22% of the relationships in the entire group were formal relationships. So in this case, there was one-way submission, or AKA a dominance relationship, and also affiliation. So that's either play or gentle affiliation. And 21% of the relationships, they were classified as egalitarian. So in that, there was affiliation between the dogs, but there was either no submission or those few relationships that had bi-directional two-way submission counted as egalitarian also. So there was no obvious dominance relationship, but the dogs did affiliate. 7% of the relationships were agonistic, where there was one-way submission, but there was no affiliation. And these relationships didn't even include the muzzle licking. There was only non-affiliative submission. No affiliation at all. And then, interestingly, about half of the relationships in the group were non-interactive. So there was no submission between the dogs and no affiliation between the dogs at all. So they really didn't interact at all other than maybe some mutual sniffing. And there was a high number of those, which is interesting. So there is one other type of relationship I want to mention, which we didn't have any in our study group, but they do exist, called unresolved relationships, where there is two-way dominance or aggressive behavior and no submission between either dog. So if we do see those relationships at daycare sometimes, so if that happens, we'll keep those dogs in different groups to prevent any fights from happening, but they do exist, so wanted to mention them. So keep in mind that this is the breakdown of the relationships in the entire group, but you can also make a pie graph like that for each individual dog and their particular relationships with the other dogs. And these pie graphs will tell you a little bit about each dog's social personality. So you'll see Wallaby and Maggie up here were very social dogs, so they had fewer non-interactive relationships than a lot of the other dogs. Maggie had a lot of egalitarian relationships. Wallaby had a lot of formal dominance relationships. And he was mid-ranking, so in some of the relationships he was dominant, in some of them he was subordinate. But you might call him status conscious. You know, dominance seems to be important to him. But let's see, Riley and Sawyer here didn't form very many dominance relationships at all. So they tended to really have either egalitarian relationships or non-interactive relationships. So they seemed much less concerned with status. Mindy here, her pie graph looks more like the average between the groups. So that's hers. But you can see that the different dogs kind of have different social personalities. So, some of the other results we found in the friendship study. First, we found that sex was a very important factor that affected relationship types. So males and females were more likely to affiliate, both play or gentle affiliation, and they were less likely to exhibit dominance than same-sex pairs. Friendly behaviors were expressed differently in formal and egalitarian relationships. So egalitarian pairs were more likely to engage in play fighting. Some of the formal relationships only included the gentle affiliation. And gentle affiliation was more reciprocal in egalitarian pairs, but it was more skewed in the formal pairs, where it was usually directed up the hierarchy. So it was usually the subordinate dog being affiliated to the dominant dog more often than vice versa. However, gentle affiliation was reciprocal in the group as a whole, so dominants were sometimes friendly in return to the subordinates. So it wasn't, if you remember that matrix, it wasn't that stark where it was all on one side. It was more reciprocal than submission. Finally, we did find that certain pairs of dogs affiliated at much higher rates than others, indicating that dogs formed friendships. So they tended to have, just a few very favorite dogs that they like to affiliate with. And most of the closest friendships occurred in mixed-sex dyads and in egalitarian, dyad is a pair, egalitarian pairs. But friendships did occur in all of the sex class and dominance combinations. So most of them were males and females and didn't have a dominance relationship, but there were male-male best friends, and there were female-female best friends, and there were some best friends that had a dominance relationship. So it's not a steadfast rule. So if you want to learn more details about those studies, I left a couple of my papers up here, but you can also download them off the website if you want to learn some more details of the research. But for now, I wanted to give you some more personal illustrations of the different types of relationships by showing you just a few case studies of some of the dogs here at Unleashed. And we'll show you what their relationships look like. So first we have Mika, very beautiful dog. And she's a 5-year-old female. She's very popular among the dogs, and lots of dogs like to offer her friendly, submissive behavior, which makes her a pretty high-ranking dog. And it's interesting, I think it's important to note that she's almost never aggressive. So again, aggression and dominance are very different things, but because a lot of dogs offer her friendly submission, that makes her a pretty high-ranking dog. So we'll see some examples of some of her relationships. This is Daphne submitting to Mika. Sometimes Mika is very vocal with her response to submission. Here's Cece and you know, the dominant kind of typically moves his head away. Here's Cece, Jasper, and Gigi all submitting to Mika. Daphne comes in and gets a couple muzzle licks in there too. So here's Mika with Brady. And Brady is doing submission to Mika, some muzzle licking. But Mika is also a very playful high-ranking dog. So sometimes it just kind of looks like submission. Sometimes they actually do play, even though they have that, you know, established relationship, dominant relationship. And Mika does have egalitarian friends too. This is her friend Spike. And there's really no obvious dominance relationship between them, but they do like to play a lot. This is Mika with Marley, and Lola's kind of in the mix too. And none of these dogs have a dominance relationship, but they do run around and play. This is her with Charlie. They play a lot too. Mika loves the game of chase. I'm going to pause really quick just to make a point. So Mika is a high-ranking dog because a lot of dogs submit to her, but she is only 5 years old, and there are a lot of older dogs at Unleash, and Mika does not outrank them. She's usually not very overt with her submission, but she does kind of politely defer to the older dogs. And so I have a couple of examples of that after the play. Loves to be chased. Here she is with Nevin, and you see it's very subtle. You know, she just kind of has her ears down and just very subtle. Here is her with Fritz, and here you see she just is kind of leave and not you know, get in Fritz's way. And so this is kind of an example of a non-interactive relationship. She and Fritz don't seem to really interact at all. And it is one example, but it might be the case that some of these non-interactive relationships are understood dominance relationships, where one dog just kind of stays out of the way of the other. So that's a yes. Okay, so next we have Jasper. He is a 1-year-old male, and he's a low-ranking dog here at Unleashed. Now that doesn't mean that he gets picked on at all. He doesn't. It just means that he offers friendly submission to some of the older dogs, and none of the dogs submit to him. We saw him showing submission to Mika earlier, and then here he is showing submission to Daphne. He also has a lot of egalitarian friends, so he and Charlie are best friends, and they play all the time without any sort of dominance relationship. Same thing with him and Gigi. Here he is with Jelly Beans, also egalitarian friends. Now here he is with Jedi, and you'll see he does a little bit of muzzle licking right there. And that was early on in their relationship, but really over time they've come to have a much more egalitarian relationship. So he very rarely, if ever, submits to her anymore. That was the muzzle licking was kind of early on in their relationship. And it's different with Duffy. So here he is with Duffy, and he is consistently submissive with Duffy. So it's different than his relationship with Jedi. And here he kind of goes back and forth with the two. So you'll see how he modifies his behavior based on which dog he's interacting with. So he'll kind of do the play fighting with Jedi. And then he'll come and be more submissive with Duffy. So Jasper's different relationships with Jedi and Duffy illustrate a couple of points. One is that relationships can change over time. So I've seen that more than once, where early on in a relationship, maybe usually the younger dog will show some submission to the older dog, but over time, as they get closer, their relationship will become much more egalitarian. The other point is that relationships may not fall into these discrete categories that we had, that I had listed above. When you're dealing with quantitative studies and numbers, putting them in distinct categories is convenient, but in real life it might be more like a spectrum. Like maybe relationships range from highly asymmetrical and formal, where one dog is always submitting to the other dog, and on the other end they're completely equal with no sort of a dominance relationship, and some relationships might fall somewhere in the middle. And it also shows how dogs can keep track of the different dogs that they interact with and behave differently depending on who their partner is. So you saw that with Jasper acting differently with Jedi and Duffy. So next we have Daphne, a 2-year-old female. Daphne's my dog, so I have a lot of videos of her. She's also very social and forms lots of different types of relationships. So we can start watching some of her. She's very often submissive, as you'll see here, to a lot of the older dogs. This is her with Nevin, one of her very favorite high-ranking males. Here she is submitting to Daisy. And again, in this interaction, it's mostly just submission, but these two do play a lot as well. And same with her and Lola. She's submitting to Lola right here. And then she'll kind of switch over and come submit to and here's Gigi submitting to Daphne. So this is Daphne more in the dominant role. So you could call her a mid-ranking dog. We saw Jasper submitting to her earlier too. She also has lots of egalitarian friends. So here she is with Puccini. And these two love to play and don't really seem to have any sort of dominant relationship. This is Daphne with Boo. Daphne and Boo they always take turns, kind of who's on top. So they're very balanced in that way. This is Daphne with Mystic, egalitarian friend. Here she is with Junior, one of her best friends, and they love to sit on each other. So even though Daphne doesn't do the affiliative submission with Junior, and sometimes they play pretty rough, you can see that they are very affectionate with each other, and they do share a lot of gentle affiliation. Now here is Daphne with Banyan, and I have a long series of clips of the way that their relationship has taken place, and these clips are over the course of about a year. So Daphne really wants to be Banyan's friend, and you'll see that Banyan at first isn't really into it. Daphne is very persistent. So here you see Banyan is responding in what they say a more ritualized way. So she's doing these muzzle bites, which is considered a dominance display, not really aggression. So she seems like she's starting to be a little more tolerant of Daphne. Not necessarily playful yet, but a little more tolerant. Daphne's maybe making some headway. So over time, I think Daphne has won Banyan over. They could probably be considered friends now. Definitely still have a dominance relationship. And Banyan still shuts her down occasionally, but she does seem to really like her, at least sometimes. So yeah, and I'd say that these videos were like over the course of a year, so it took kind of a long time to really establish a friendship. No, they seem to like each other. So that relationship is a good illustration of how dogs might use submission as a way to establish friendships with higher ranking dogs that initially might not be so interested in having a friendship with them. And the higher ranking dog, you can see becomes more tolerant and eventually even friendly over time. So that might be a strategy that dogs use, is friendly submission. Okay. So next we have Lizzie Bean. Lizzie Bean's popular in this crowd. Lizzie Bean is a very playful dog, but unlike the dogs that we've seen so far, she doesn't really seem to be interested in formal dominance relationships at all. I do have one video here that I'm going to start out with where Cece is offering Lizzie Bean some muzzle licking and some submission. But honestly, Lizzie Bean seems like a little confused by it. I don't speak that, I only want to play. So mostly she has egalitarian friends. Here she is with Junior and Daphne. And Lizzie Bean's two very best friends are probably Sophie and Abby. And here she and Sophie are kind of just chewing on Abby. Here she is wrestling around with Sophie. Here are the three of them being really cute. So Lizzie Bean does also hump Abby sometimes, as you'll see here. But other than that, they don't really seem to have any sort of dominance relationship. And she also likes to nibble Abby a lot. And she really likes her. So I can't remember, you can see how much they love each other. But I can't remember if I mentioned back when I was doing the dominance results, I might have forgotten. But we did find, I think I did forget, when I was saying that submission was the best indicator of dominance relationships. One interesting thing that we found with the dominance study is that mounting or humping was actually not correlated with any of the other agonistic or dominance related behaviors. So muzzle bites were, and the high posture were, and aggression, those things were all correlated with the receipt of submission, but mounting were not related to any of the dominance behaviors at all. So they weren't a good indicator of dominance relationships, unlike how a lot of people have assumed for a long time. What we did find when we looked at the affiliation behaviors is that mounting was highly correlated with both play and gentle affiliation. So I can't say that humping is never about dominance. I think maybe sometimes it is, but for the most part, dogs just hump other dogs that they really like. So it really doesn't seem to be about dominance. It seems to be more often about play and affiliation. And again, it's a courtship behavior, and so it makes sense that that might be related to the other gentle affiliative courtship type behaviors. So. Okay, next we have Roscoe. Like Lizzie Bean, Roscoe doesn't seem to be interested in dominance relationships at all, but he is very social and he plays a lot. I've never seen him submit to any other dog. I've never seen any other dog submit to him. But he does have a lot of egalitarian friends, which I'll show you here. So here he is playing with Buster. Here he is playing with Puccini. This is Roscoe and Roscoe. These two are really good friends. And you'll see that Roscoe, although he doesn't do any submissive behavior or anything like that, he is really good at modifying his play style most of the time. So you'll see he's playing with Augie here, and he's more than willing to roll over, which probably encourages Augie to play with him some more. There he is with Rizzo. So when Roscoe and Roscoe play, they're pretty rough. And when Roscoe plays with some of the other dogs, he tends to kind of let them win a little more often. Here's a little progression on a relationship of Roscoe and Daphne. So at first, he kind of came on a little strong, and Daphne seems like she kind of wants to play with him, but she's not really sure. Later he rolls over for her, and she seems much more happy to play with him. And here he is nibbling her, so they've actually become really close friends now. And they seem to like each other. So this is a good example of how dogs might use play as an alternative strategy to submission. To establish close friendships and negotiate potential power differences in relationships. So some dogs might use submissive behaviors to get a dog to like them. Some dogs might use play and different play maneuvers. And as we've seen, some dogs use different strategies in different relationships. So finally, we also have a lot of friendships at Unleashed that are more mellow than the ones I've been showing you in the videos. In many of these relationships, one or maybe both of the dogs are getting older, or they're just less interested in play fighting. And these friendships might involve subtle greetings with just some gentle nose nudges, and then the dogs will snuggle, which is really cute, or maybe even just hang out near each other. So I'll give you these dogs. This is Corey and Nevin. We did see them doing a little bit of courtship type behavior earlier, but they're both getting older, and they don't do much interacting, but they do still kind of like to hang out by each other. Here's Mindy and Maple. This is Riley and Fritz. This is Cullen and Mindy. Jamie Oliver and Paco. Jamie Oliver and Theo. Frankie and Buttercream. Here's Wally and Theo. Jamie Oliver, he's a big snuggler. Grover. Alpine and Reagan. This is Max and Cullen and Mindy, all kind of hanging out by each other. They're a little bit of a crew. And here's a crew you'll see a lot too, which is Laser Wolf, Wally, and Jamie Oliver. And even if they don't do a lot of overt interactions, they do seem to like each other a lot. I think the friendships are equally as adorable as the other ones that I showed you, and they're probably just as rewarding for the dogs. In conclusion, dogs are really interesting and smart. My studies, I think, show that dogs form highly complex and differentiated relationships with other dogs, and that suggests that they have remarkable social cognitive abilities. It means they have the mental capacity to keep track of several different social partners and behave differently with each one depending on the other dog's age, sex, and personality. Given the complexity of their social relationships, dogs are probably capable of complex social emotions as well, like love, jealousy, loneliness, least some form of those emotions. And many other non-human animals probably feel some form of these emotions as well. And I think it's important to acknowledge this when we as humans have so much control over the lives of many different animals. Finally, friendships improve well-being. So in many different species, studies show that affiliative behavior and close social bonds are associated with lower heart rates, reduced stress, improved immune function, and enhanced longevity. In dogs in particular, exchanging friendly behavior with a familiar dog friend triggered the release of oxytocin, which is a hormone that's associated with social bonding and positive emotions. So friendships are good for you. And I want to close with a heartbreaking video. This is from YouTube, you guys might have seen it. It's a pair of dogs in Santiago, Chile, and it really shows us just how valuable having a dog friend can be.
This is truly amazing. Here's a dog who's been hit by a car trying to cross the road. Here he is trying to cross the road, and he gets hit, and is now just lying in the middle of this busy highway, and a second dog spots him and tries to get over to him. Here's the first dog again being hit. He's lying there in the middle of the road, busy time of the highway, and here comes the second dog who grabs him, not with his teeth, but actually gets him with his paws around his neck and drags him in the middle of all this traffic off the road to safety, little by little, inch by inch. Finally, some workers spot the dogs and come over and help them. And by the way, the injured dog lived.
So that's it. That's all I have for you today. I'm happy to answer any questions if you want, or we can just party.
Your dog's name was Daphne, right? In watching Daphne, I was thinking of her as a kind of therapy dog for other dogs because she reaches out in such interesting ways. And places like the Trio Foundation, where they rehabilitate injured dogs, they have a series of therapy dogs who do exactly what Daphne does.
Oh, nice.
It's really a gift.
Yeah.
That she has gifts.
Yeah. Well, and she is incredibly sweet with a lot of the dogs, and there are some dogs that she's less sweet with. I don't have videos, but that is a really good point, and I mean, and that's another kind of way that I think relationships with other dogs can be so important and healing for other dogs. So yeah, that's a really good idea.
I was just wondering if there was any correlation between how often a dog came to daycare and his or her tendency to be dominant or submissive.
Yeah, I did look at that. I looked at, because I did, some dogs come every day and some only a couple times a week. And I didn't find any really relationship on that, whether they were dominant or submissive, or even what I really was interested in is those non-interactive relationships. I thought maybe they were just relationships where they didn't have enough time to interact. But I didn't find that the dogs that had less observation time formed more non-interactive relationships. And yeah, I didn't see any sort of relationship with that. One thing that I have noticed, I didn't measure it in data, but it kind of seems like dogs are more likely to be submissive to the dogs that started daycare. So when Daphne started, she was submissive to all the older dogs that were there at the time. But then there are some other older dogs that had started daycare afterwards that she's not really submissive to. So she's not necessarily submissive to all older dogs. She seems to be submissive to the ones that were here before she started, because they were like already established maybe. So that might be some sort of effect there, yeah. Mm-hmm.
How much do you use this information when new dogs come into daycare?
I don't know. I definitely pay attention to whether, to the types of behaviors that a new dog shows, whether they're, showing submissive behavior or just playful behavior or dominant behavior. Obviously, aggressive behavior is more of a red flag than any of the other ones. But all those different personality types are welcome at daycare. But it is, I think it is valuable just to know all the different types of relationships so that what kind of behavior you're seeing with a new dog. how quickly they kind of form relationships with other dogs. I don't know if that answers your
Can I
question.
add to that really quick? Just from watching Becky do the trial days that I've seen her do, I actually think you are really great at selecting dogs that will do well. If we have a new
Oh,
dog
good
coming
point.
in that we're nervous, like we don't know how they're gonna interact, we have a handful of dogs that we're like, well, they get along with everybody, so we're gonna, you know.
Right. Or yeah, where
Whereas
they're
like Riley, who you know she was kind of a bully, so she was usually one of the last ones that we would introduce to the other dogs.
yeah, and then right, and if there's a dog that I usually probably will start with a dog that isn't really interested in dominance relationships, and then maybe start with dogs that tend to be lower ranking, and then maybe introduce them to the higher ranking dogs last. Although again, the point that we made with Mika earlier is that Mika, even though she's a high ranking dog, she's almost never aggressive, so she's really friendly. So she might be a dog that I would introduce early on too. So yeah, it does come in handy.
Behavior that I saw even in the videos, and one that my dog exhibits all the time, is just standing around on the sidelines and barking at
That's the third wheel syndrome.
Yeah. Where does that fall in the rankings, or does it just a neutral?
Yeah, I don't think that counts as dominant or submissive behavior. I think most of the time that dog just wants to join in on the play. Sometimes with a lot of like herding dog behavior, that you see like fun policing behavior. One of my dogs is very guilty of that, where he doesn't want other dogs to play really. Like, cut it out, you guys are too rowdy. So I think that's part of it.
And that is a herding dog.
It's a herding dog trait, the
I'm
fun
just
police,
curious.
yeah. And
where
it's
it
not
comes
only
from.
herding dogs do it, but I do see it more often in herding dogs. And didn't we find out that Winston's not a herding dog?
We don't know.
His DNA.
Yeah,
or
we did a
whatever.
DNA, and there wasn't.
He acts like a herding dog.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah. No, but I did actually do. Hi. I did do a study on third-party interventions actually, and that didn't count the dog just. It didn't count the dog just sitting around barking, but I did find that when dogs actually intervene when two dogs are playing, that they tend to target their best friends as opposed to support them. So I think that usually they just want to join in. Play with me, don't play with each other. Yeah.
I have two questions. First, in the comment, a lot of the submissive are the affiliation play I see between my dog and cats. The cats that are in our house, they're always doing that to one another, nuzzling each other and sniffing each other and rolling around and with each other. And the other thing is, how can you use that information to decide whether to integrate another dog into your house?
Well, I think the really the most valuable thing from here, as far as like getting a second dog or introducing a new dog, is really the male and female thing. So again, it's not a steadfast rule. Some male dogs can be really close, and the same with female, but in general, what I've done, because I always have multi-dog households, I usually, sometimes I'll have 3 dogs, but I usually, if I have a male, I would recommend to people to get a female dog as their second dog, because I think there's, with the data even shows, they're more likely to affiliate and less likely to have a dominance relationship. Also, it wasn't one of the results here, but they're less likely to be aggressive. So aggression was more common between same-sex dogs. So that's one thing that I always tell people if they're getting a second dog, to probably get a sex other than the one you already have. But the dog cat affiliative play is really cute. I love to see videos of that.
So do you think the dogs actually use this behavior on their owners? Because I just had this epiphany that I think I'm getting muzzle licked. I was like, please, oh, maybe I am dominant.
No, absolutely. I really do. Yes, I do think so. I think the dogs are showing us submission when they give us kisses, especially on the mouth, for sure. Definitely.
I have a question off of that. Because you know how complicated Lainey is, but she licks the baby all the time. But I don't trust that she's.
Well, and sometimes the licks can be like different than muzzle licks. So there are some, even in a couple times you see the bidirectional muzzle licking where there's licking that's just kind of affection. I think that what Lainey does is not necessarily super common in dogs, but I've seen not only her but some other dogs do it where it's almost like more of a test. And like
Testing of a bond.
yeah, or testing of how much can they get away with. And I think that is probably true. The other thing is that sometimes even when dogs are being submissive, they're testing a relationship. So I don't have any videos right now, but there is something that's called obnoxious submission, where the dog that's showing the submission, they might have the crouch posture and they're licking the mouth of the other dog, but they're really like displacing them and jumping on them, and it's almost can be aggressive, certainly obnoxious. And I think that is like, can be like, I know I'm supposed to be submissive to you, but I'm going to really kind of test and see how much I can get away with. So they can not only use the muzzle licking to establish close friendships, but also to kind of test how much they can get away with in that particular relationship.
Well, I thought I was going to ask you about that because I think that's interesting because when I am watching canine communication, I see the muzzle licking going on for too long. I usually interrupt it because you usually get the dominant dog getting a little bit perturbed and acting out. Right. Similar to how I think Daphne and the other, what's his name, Bonsai? Banyan. Right. How that relationship started out. And right. Do you ever interrupt it or do you just let it play out? Because that was beautiful how it eventually turned into a friendship.
Yeah, and with those dogs, they had already known each other kind of when that started, and it was, so, but I do interrupt it often when it's dogs that don't know each other really well. So, and that kind of ties in with your question too. If you see a dog that starts daycare and they're like really muzzle licking another dog, I will interrupt it because the muzzle licking can sometimes trigger aggression from the other dog. Because it is, and it looks like it's kind of annoying sometimes. And as humans who get licked, it is kind of annoying sometimes, And there's a whole paper on that called The Testing of a Bond. And it's an old paper, but it's a really great one. But yeah, I mean, I think that definitely happens. And I do interrupt it if it's dogs that just met. And then if I kind of am more comfortable that it's not going to turn anything more than the like muzzle biting that you saw, after the dogs get to know each other, then I'll, and that's true with anything, even with rough play. Like a lot of dogs here at daycare play really rough, and a lot of times it's fine and it doesn't turn into a fight. But if I see a dog that just started and they're playing with a dog that he doesn't know really well and the play gets really rough, I'm going to interrupt a lot more often than I would if it's dogs that know each other really well. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was wondering, I guess most of this is looking at binary dog relationships, but I'm wondering, any thoughts about broader path relationships? I guess I have a theory about Poppy that I don't know if it's true or not, that in a path her relationship, her role would be the dog that tries to make sure that the path stays cohesive, because she's always concerned, like if I'm walking with a couple other people, that there isn't like a straggler behind us or anything like that. But, and I don't know if you have any thoughts about broader paths.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure about the specific stuff that you saw in Pappy, but it'd be interesting. I know there's a group of researchers that study feral dogs out in Italy, and they did show that high-ranking dogs, especially those that are more affiliative, so like we showed Mika, she's like a really friendly alpha or a really friendly high-ranking dog, were much better leaders, so they were followed by other dogs much more often than high-ranking dogs that were a little bit more aggressive. So that would be, maybe just affiliative behaviors are more likely to keep a group cohesive. The other thing that's a little bit of a side note, but that I've noticed is that sometimes having a friend, so if you look at a group of 3 dogs, one dog might be submissive to this dog most of the time, but if they have their buddy over here, if they have their friend, they might be a little bit more high-ranking with their friend around. So that can happen too, if you have an ally, and that happens a lot in primates too.
So I noticed when I come to pick our dog up that it's usually the same dog sitting at the fence watching him go. Is that like his friends, or was they all bark when I walk in, I'll be quiet, and then all of a sudden there's this disruption, and I'm sure they just want to tell me to go away.
Yeah, well, I think it's really exciting whenever anyone comes in, and I don't know if it's necessarily his friends that are watching him go. I think probably it's more likely that they are just waiting for their parents to come get them. They're hoping that you were coming to pick them, that you were their mom coming to pick them up instead of Max's mom.
I'll tell them I'm sorry.
But there are some.
I'm sorry, I'm not your mom.
But yeah.
You mean they hate to be the last?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if they necessarily hate to be the last. I mean, the very last probably, but there are definitely a lot of dogs, and I never close these days anymore because I have my kids, but I definitely know there are a lot of dogs that when there's only a few dogs left, like there's a lot of dogs that won't really play all that much at daycare, but then when there's only 4 dogs left here, then they just start playing. I think maybe they're a little bit more comfortable with a smaller group, and so they feel safer playing. But I have seen that. So some dogs, and I think Mindy is kind of like that. So I think sometimes when she's one of the last dogs, she'll be like, "Yay, come on!" All right. Oh, one more. Sure.
Just the fact that you said that dogs have complex emotions is such an important point, because the laws in the country still treat animals as property.
Right.
Our dogs as property, and especially in the South, they're treated that way. And so many people feel that they don't experience feelings like love and so forth. And do you find that there's a real movement to publicize that more, or to convince people?
Yeah, I think that there is. When I first started out and studying primates as an undergrad, even just saying that animals had emotions at all was really taboo. And all the researchers were like, you can't say that. And since then, there's been some research. It's hard to measure emotions, but there are some. You can use physiology that are often related to emotions in humans, and then use that to say that animals might feel emotions. They also can do brain scans sometimes. But there has been some research that suggests that animals do in fact feel emotions, and it seems pretty obvious. And especially just kind of the more we learn about animals in general, whether it's dogs or any other animals, and we learn about the social complexity. And they have, in a lot of primate studies, they've proved that or at least supported the fact that animals feel jealousy. So and I think they did this with dogs too, where they asked the dogs to do the same thing, just sit or whatever it was, and one dog got like a piece of meat and the other dog just got like a little, milk bone or something, and the ones that consistently got the lesser reward just stopped doing it, I'm not gonna do this, this guy's getting beef. But then when they had it, and both dogs were getting that lower value reward, they continued to do it just fine. So it was only like kind of the sight of the other dog getting something better. And monkeys do that too. So I think there are a lot of studies coming out, and there's a lot more books written about it too, that it's pretty obvious that animals feel emotions. And evolutionarily, emotions are a lot simpler than kind of cognitive processes. So it's probably the fact that emotions come evolutionarily before, the cognitive understanding of things. So emotions probably exist in a lot more animals than we think, and are probably more complex in animals than we think.
Well, could that be because emotions are more intuitive?
Yeah, and they're kind of just like more physiological, as opposed to cognitive.
Like the gut
Yeah,
feeling, the gut feeling of a dog.
Right. You don't need to have, you know, an in-depth understanding of death to feel grief, you know?
The loss, yeah.
Right.
What do you think is the most important new kinds of work that need to be done for us to understand animal emotions better?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I don't know.
Is there new work out there that you think is really innovative and exciting?
Nothing comes to mind right now. I don't know, but
Okay.
I think they're definitely a really interesting field, and I think they're, I wish I had better examples for you, but there's a lot of stuff being done in that area.
I want to say something. So Max and Maple were really good friends.
They were, yes.
And when Max was really sad for a week, we couldn't figure out why. Then we learned that Maple had passed away. And it was like us talking to him. It's almost like he understood what happened, and he started to. So I think there's real value in understanding the dog's emotions, because we couldn't figure out why he was so sad.
Right.
And
How did he
so
display the sadness?
he was really mopey, and he kept his head down, and he's got really expressive eyes, at least to us. And his eyes were just so sad, and sometimes I swear he was crying. Like he doesn't usually get little water things, and he get little water things in his eyes. And so we noticed that, and then they told us that they home passed. So I think there's some value studying that, because
For sure. Yeah, we've had a ton of not a ton, but we've definitely had several dogs that started coming to daycare because their dog friend at home had passed away, and their owners had noticed that they've just been really depressed and think they need, more dog-dog friendships in their life. And a lot of times they said it helps, not immediately, but, it does help to have other relationships to kind of fill the void a little bit.